What up, everybody? This is Double G from the Fight Game Podcast. This is our We Want Flair podcast that we do on the Fight Game Podcast feed. We split it up into segments, and especially for YouTube, or specifically for YouTube, I put those segments together, and it is now exclusive on our YouTube channel. So this is the March We Want Flair match. It's Lex Luger, Ric Flair, Starrcade 88. We break down all of 1988 leading into the match, early issues with Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes, and then there's, Lex and whether or not they're going to put the belt on him. Ted Turner buys WCW, which leverages out Dusty Rhodes, actually. And just all of the beginning and end leading up to that Starrcade, and then also what happens in early 89, which is pretty fascinating too. So check it out. We Want Flair, Lex Luger, Ric Flair, Starrcade 88. This is our March of 2000, all the segments put into one. Enjoy. John and I are doing a segment on Ric Flair's matches and stories, and so we're going to do one on the next one that we're doing is Lex Luger's match at Starrcade 88. And so...
Oh, that's the one. Is that the Norfolk?
Because they did one at Great American Bash.
Norfolk at
that
the Scope.
Summer.
At the Scope.
And then they did the Starrcade one.
That's the one. That's the real intriguing one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one in Norfolk because it was supposed to be Ric Flair and Rick Steiner.
Right.
And Dusty was trying to get Ric Flair to go on, and then Jim Herd was in the panic and called up Larry Mattisek. I remember that day like it was yesterday, me and Larry and Jim Herd back and forth all day trying to, with Larry basically telling Jim Herd how to handle the situation. And, because the whole thing was, the key is that if Flair was unhappy and left, which he could have done, then the Turner deal may very likely have fallen through, and then it would have been the end of the company.
Yep.
So it was like a lot was riding on this, on making Ric Flair happy. And the thing is, Rick was not aware of any of this, because Rick afterwards, he's gone, if I had known this, he could have played for a harder deal.
Right.
But he didn't realize how important he was to Turner making that deal to buy the company. So they had to have Rick in tow, and Dusty was just trying to get rid of Rick, because I don't think Dusty wanted someone else to buy the company, because as long as Crockett had it, I think that Crockett would have never gotten rid of Dusty as booker.
Right.
And you put in a new owner, and all the talent at this point was, mad at Dusty. Dusty knew his days were kind of numbered, and they were going to go in another direction. So it was a really intriguing period.
So that whole time period is fascinating.
Absolutely. Changed the whole business.
So rewinding a little bit, because we're talking about Lex, and I've read up stuff. I know I've read up matches and Lex's book, which is kind of interesting. But the beginning of his career is a bit of a blind spot for me. I know that he was
Florida?
wrestling in Florida.
Yeah. He got pushed from day one.
CWF.
I think that they gave him the Southern title like he was only probably wrestling for, I don't remember how long, but maybe only a couple of weeks, and they gave him the Southern title right away.
Yeah, he beat Wahoo.
Right, yeah.
So as a prospect, or, today we see tons of guys coming through NXT or whatever, and you kind of go, in a couple of years, that guy is going to be really good. Was Lex thought of in that way back then?
Lex from day one, they thought he was going to be the next Hulk Hogan, and bigger than Hulk Hogan, because the whole idea is Hogan's bald, Lex isn't bald. Lex has a better body than Hogan. He's almost the same height as Hogan. He's a better athlete than Hogan. Just wasn't as charismatic as Hogan. But when he came in, it was like Hulk Hogan was the star, and this is going to be the next star. So yes, he was thought of, and especially by Bill Apter, which is funny because Lex wasn't always the nicest guy to Bill Apter at all. And Bill Apter was the one who really made, I think Lex would have made it anyway, but Bill Apter was the one who really made Lex's career at the beginning, because he put him on the cover of every magazine because they thought he would sell magazines because of how he looked. And they created this Lex Luger aura that no one in Florida had seen, outside of Florida, had seen Lex Luger. So it's just some guy in pictures. And he got signed after 1 year to a $500,000 a year contract, which was incredible money in those days. Nobody got that except for like Ric Flair and Hogan and maybe Macho Man in the whole business. So it was like the whole thing is nobody ever made more money based on potential than Lex Luger. I mean, they brought him in, and I mean, the whole thing was he was going to be in the Horsemen. The whole deal. He was going to be in the Horsemen. He was going to learn from Flair by being there. Then they were going to do the angle where him and Flair split up, and then he was going to win the title, and he was going to be Hulk Hogan. He's going to be Hulk Hogan, and the new Hulk Hogan, and the better Hulk Hogan, and they were going to win the wrestling war. That's how Lex Luger was supposed to be at the beginning.
You mentioned the Hogan comparison, which is, I think, the natural one. But what's also funny.
Vince wanted him to be the next Hulk Hogan too.
What's funny though is I want to say these observers are in the late '87-ish time frame. You wrote that the next Hulk Hogan would look nothing like the current Hulk Hogan.
Of course, obviously. Well, I read a lot of that old stuff, and it's interesting. But yeah, because copies never are as good as the original. And you're going to want something different, whether it's...
Though the Hogan sort of re-envisioning or remixing
the next
Superstar Billy Graham.
But Superstar Billy Graham was years earlier. There was a big break between Superstar Billy Graham and Hulk Hogan.
Right.
I mean, the next Hulk Hogan was Steve Austin, who, I mean, he was very, very different from Hulk Hogan. Very different.
Yeah. I mean, the next Hulk Hogan was almost Hulk Hogan in the NWO. Yeah. Okay, so as a worker, reading back through a lot of those observers, it seems like the athleticism was there, the cardio wasn't there. He was really muscular, which blew him up a lot, but he was put with some really good workers, so he had good matches. Sometimes.
When he was in Florida, I was not impressed, but it was so early in his career, he was just being pushed way too fast. But he had pretty much nothing matches in Florida. Rick struggled to get like a 3-star match out of him, and that's Ric Flair in his prime.
So the match that Luger mentions in the book, he says that he went Broadway, but I looked it up, and I believe the match he's talking about with Flair is the Battle of the Belts 3.
Right, which was like, I think it was about 30 minutes.
31 minute time limit match.
Well, it was what didn't they do like it was a 3-fall match, but they did like
one apiece.
They did time limits on the falls, like maybe was it like 20 minutes each fall? So
yeah, that part I don't know.
I don't remember exactly, but it was like it was a draw, but it was nowhere close to 60 minutes because they knew he couldn't go 60. So it was like about 30 minutes. I remember watching the match, and that's the one I was actually thinking of. That Flair's, I mean, it was a passable almost good match. Like, 3-star, 2 3/4, 3 1/4 type match, I think. I mean, but way like Ric Flair would have better matches with almost anyone than he had with Luger on that night.
So when he comes into to Crockett, he replaces Ole in the Horseman.
Yeah.
And you go all the way to Starrcade, and he loses to Dusty in the cage in a finish that was sort of reminiscent of how he won the title against Nikita. JJ throws the chair over the cage. He knocks out Nikita, puts him in the torture rack. In this match, JJ throws the chair in, and Dusty DDTs Lex onto the chair. I think that's how I haven't seen that match in a long time.
Yeah.
But so at that point, you had written that the turn, because he turns by not allowing JJ Dillon to win the Bunkhouse Battle Royal. Mm-hmm. All the Horsemen are left except for Flair. It's the 4 of them. JJ's telling the referee, all 4 of us can just win and we'll share the prize. And he's like, no. And then JJ thinks like, maybe I can win this match. Arn and Tully jump over the top rope. Lex doesn't. Lex clotheslines. I think he clotheslines him out. And then he gets jumped. And so he wins the match, and then he gets jumped out of the Horsemen. Mm-hmm. So that's how that angle worked. But as he is turned babyface, you're basically writing that at the time that the writing is on the wall for Crockett. They just got blown out of the water because Starrcade sucked, and it didn't get the distribution was awful because Vince pulled the power play.
Vince pulled the power play, so there was all this money that they were expecting to make, millions of dollars on that show.
Like $3 million, they probably would have made more if Vince didn't do that.
Yeah, it probably cost them $3 million, which at the time, the way the business was, I mean, that was make or break, you know, because they had spent a lot of money and they needed that $3 million. They didn't get it. I mean, that power play by Vince. I mean, the irony to me always was that power play by Vince led to Crockett having to sell, and he sells to Turner. So Vince ends up, and it didn't really turn out that way, but at the time it's like Vince went and put somebody out of business and ended up with a enemy 10 times bigger. It was like in hindsight, at the moment when they sold, it was kind of like, that was the stupidest thing Vince ever did, because he could always, he just based on the size of his markets and Crockett's home market, you know, Charlotte versus New York, Vince would always have the edge, no matter how much better Crockett's wrestling was and booking or whatever. And his booking wasn't better. I mean, at that point anymore. His wrestling was still better. And then he bought himself, or he won a war and got a new enemy who should have beat Vince, but, you know, they were incompetent too.
Do you think that they pull the trigger? Like I guess my question is, was this Lex turn the idea from day one, or do you think they fast forwarded the turn because the product seemed really cold after how bad Starrcade was?
I didn't get the impression that made a difference. I figured it was going to be about a year, and yeah, I mean, it's possible that they did it because they needed something that year, and Flair and Lex they knew would do business, because Lex's turn, you know, that did reverberate, you know, it really built the company, because Lex and Arn would do some singles matches where Lex would win to set up the Flair match, and Lex and Arn were doing big business. They were doing a lot of good great gates, and then Flair and Lex was a real strong program at the gate. You know, a lot of people rip on the finish at the Great American Bash with that blood, and the execution of it was terrible because it was barely bleeding. But coming off of that, they did great business for the rematches. So it was, you know, a lot of people, they should have just put him over. And it's like, Lex chasing did business.
Yeah.
Then you know, it was going to run its course, like everything in wrestling runs its course. And you know, I mean, the way it turned out was, I mean, it was the only way it could turn out because of the way the politics and the sale and everything were going. Whether it would have been the right thing had Crockett, you know, not been selling, maybe Lex win the title. Probably at that point, if he wasn't selling, it'd certainly be worth the experiment, because Flair could always get it back if it didn't work.
Right.
And, you know, Lex was pretty hot.
So I'm still doing my research, and I'm around the spring going into the summer, so I'm getting close to that Great American Bash match. But Lex turns, he's tag teaming with Barry Windham.
And then Barry turns on him.
They eventually win the tag titles, then Barry turns on him. But in that time frame, like, Lex and Rick aren't really in the mix. I think they're doing six-mans, and Rick's probably involved, but it's mostly against Tully and Arn.
Right.
And so it's like Barry and Lex and Tully and Arn. And so it seems like they're saving, you know, to get ready for that program.
They tried to, you know, keep them apart because they knew that the money program was Flair and Lex.
But in the meantime, they decide to head up against WrestleMania 4.
Right.
With Clash of the Champions. Lex isn't in that match. Lex is actually in the tag team stuff still at that point. And instead, Sting is in that match.
Well, they didn't want to put Lex on TV because they wanted the first match with Flair and Lex to be on the pay-per-view. And pay-per-view was where the money is. And the TV was just a showcase show. It wasn't one of those things where, even though ratings were phenomenal, I mean, they'd never had a show like that. But it wasn't, you know, you didn't make money off of television. So, you know, it was like, I mean, Sting was just a guy.
Yeah.
Although he had great potential, and we all knew that Sting was going to be a big star already. You know, the fact is that Sting was in that spot by default. It wasn't like Sting had been built up for that spot. He was barely in main events at that time.
Well, he actually replaces Michael P.S. Hayes.
Right.
In the main events, because something happened with PS. There was a contract dispute, or because he then soon thereafter he's booking World Class, I believe.
Okay, yeah.
So Sting is like wrestling Flair heading into the Clash around
in a few shows,
cities,
and it wasn't drawing big or anything.
And so then they have this Starrcade match, and by that point,
I'm sorry. The Clash. The Clash.
By that point, you were writing. Even before that match, like a couple weeks before that match, you were already writing that you thought Sting had surpassed Lex as the new upcoming babyface for Flair.
He was getting better reactions by that point. This is, 88. He had more charisma than Lex. But he didn't draw bigger than Lex against Flair. I mean, Flair and Luger, for whatever reason, always drew bigger than Flair and Sting. But Sting got much bigger crowd pops than Luger because he connected with the crowd, which Luger was too cold to connect. He connected with the crowd good, but he was still very aloof and the people could see through it, and Sting seemed like a cooler guy. So I always thought that, like, in the long run, Sting was going to be the bigger star. I was pretty sure Sting was going to be the bigger star of the two. I mean, I remember, it was so funny because the first person who I think really hit on Sting was Eddie Gilbert in Mid-South. And Eddie Gilbert, like, was telling me, like, when I'm going to turn Sting, and he's going to be the hottest babyface, because they were a tag team. They were a heel tag team, and he turned Sting. And then I remember going to Houston, and Eddie Gilbert's just like, you got to see Sting, you got to see his reaction. He comes out, I'm in a show in Houston, good reaction, not through the roof good, but good. And this is right. So Eddie's telling me this before the sale. At this point, they've just sold. So they're doing a tournament for, I don't know if it was, I forget the championship, might have been the Western States Heritage or something, but they created some title. But what I do remember is that Sting got beat by Black Bart. And this is like, now Dusty's in charge, and it's just like, and Eddie's already kind of telling me that, like, this is, you know, he's already getting frustrated because basically all of the UWF guys were being used to put over the Crockett guys. You know, they were squandering it. But then Sting is like his big thing, you know, the guy who, you know, and Sting was, of all those Mid-South guys, Sting was really the only one who survived at any kind of a level. And, you know, because, you know, Chris Adams and Terry Taylor and all those guys didn't do anything there. Eddie didn't really get to do much, but Sting snuck up. Sting was, like, kind of kept. He signed like a $52,000 a year contract, and you know, he was just there, and was kind of kept in prelims. Like, he was an opening match on the opening match on the Flair on one of the pay-per-views. I remember
Starrcade '87. I think he was in like a 6-man or something.
In a 6-man, right?
With Rick Steiner.
So he wasn't really doing much, and it was just kind of like they put him in some house shows with Flair, and, you know, it was, like I said, it wasn't that big. And then the thing opened up where they needed a guy to go with Flair on the Clash. And then the Clash did a phenomenal rating. And in one night, you know, from there, after that, like, Sting was a superstar in one night because after the Flair match, because Flair, you know, it was 45-minute draw on television. People had never seen a match that good. You know, it wasn't like the best Flair match, but it was pretty damn great. You know, and I think it won match of the year. And, you know, but for TV, in those days, you never saw matches like that on TV.
And then they let it run all the way through because they did all the commercials earlier in the show.
Right. They went 45 minutes straight. They had that stupid judging thing, which was just stupid, but, you know. But, I mean, it was, at the end, Flair not beating him made Sting a star, and Sting getting all the near falls. And it was you know, it's probably, not even probably, it is certainly the one, you know, like the first, you know, the last time that, and the first, whatever, that in one night, a guy went from being somewhat unknown, kind of high prelim guy, to where he was, you know, the hottest babyface in that company, and by the end of that match.
Okay, one more card I just want to get your feedback on. So they do that show, and very quickly thereafter, I think it's like maybe a couple weeks, is the Crockett Cup.
Yeah.
And so Dusty and Nikita were supposed to be a team again. Then the Midnight Rider stuff is about to happen. Nikita actually gets the shot at Rick.
I was at that show in Greensboro with Rick and Nikita, which was not a good match.
Right.
Well, I mean, it was okay. I mean, by Ric Flair standards, it was not a good match.
But instead of going back to Sting, they go with Nikita, which I think you had written something like, oh, yeah, you know, it's just Dusty's kind of giving him a nice match, I guess, because Dusty's out of that tag team match. He's like doing his friend a favor or something like that you had written as the reason why. But then in the tag tournament, Sting and Luger, who were not paired up in that tag tournament, they both had lost their partners, and then they get together and then they win the whole thing.
Yeah.
Do you even remember anything about that?
I remember being there. I remember it was kind of good, but I remember the crowd wasn't that good. Greenville was not sold out the first night, but not bad. I mean, it was close to full. It was a decent crowd. And then Greensboro was, I'm thinking like in the 6,000 range. I remember it not being a good crowd. But the show was a good show. You know, it was definitely a fun show live.
All right, Dave, thanks for helping us set the table.
Okay, cool.
Okay, back here with John. Anything you wanted to follow up on in the interview that I did with Dave?
I thought it was really good, informative, a lot of stuff I kind of already knew. I still think, you were talking about how like Dave was right about Sting and how like Dave felt that Sting was the guy. I also thought Luger was the guy with Sting, but maybe Sting and Luger were eventually a great rivalry for the NWA for the future. So I thought, in their own way, maybe Luger might not be the top babyface of the promotion, but I think he could have been a successful heel to, Sting's Lex Luthor to Sting being Superman. I thought they could have been a great rivalry, which I always wanted to happen, and I always felt like it was going to happen. And when it did happen, Luger was gone and trying to be a bodybuilder after that.
I think, don't you think, though, that, and we'll sort of explain who Lex was. Lex, to me, in reading his book, in going through these 88 Observers, he was a businessman. Mm-hmm. He did not grow up wanting to be a wrestler, obviously. He wanted to make as much money as possible. He understood in professional football how, that was where he wanted to make his money. And he found out that the injuries and stuff hurt his athleticism, and he was never going to make it in football. And he could use that athleticism with his body in pro wrestling. But even from day one, like, Dave mentioned in that thing, how he was already making a lot more money than guys who had been there for a while. So, from that point of view, like, imagine the locker room and how, not saying he wasn't one of the boys, but imagine how the jealousy could have picked up. And if Lex is not like, oh yeah, I'm here forever. Like, I want to be the best wrestler in the world. Like, maybe if that gets a rise out of some guys and maybe gives him a little bit of a bad rep. But I mean, the fact is that he was truly about the business, and that's kind of what it's all about at the end of the day, is being a smart businessman. And he was a smart businessman.
Yeah, definitely. And, he was a hot young prospect, and look at him, man. He was like the perfect specimen for a pro wrestler, right? And, didn't look like a lot of other guys. He was chiseled and had like Jim Ross always say 7% body fat. He used to always say that, which is probably true. 6'5", 265 or 275. I used to love that when Jim Ross would make that call about Lex Luger. But he was, I always think like people's memories of Luger gets tainted by, especially the Nitro era days when guys were just making millions and not giving a shit, and just collecting those checks, not working hard. But like I tell them, I want people to sit there and take a deep dive into Lex Luger 1989 and tell me different. Tell me you still see this guy who doesn't really care and is lazy. Like I don't see that in Luger 1989 or 1990 or even 88.
He's good in 88.
Yeah, he's good for his experience level. Don't forget, this is 2 years in. It debuted in 86.
And, this is not going to be part of our story, but I think what hurts Lex with wrestling fans, obviously him leaving WCW for WWF, but also the way that he was sort of, whether you want to say failed or not, they wanted him to be the next Hogan. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't win the belt from Yokozuna and looks like a goober. And then it quickly moves on, and it's Bret Hart's time. And then, also there is a post Attitude Era career with Lex where Miss Elizabeth dies right in front of him, right? So that's going to be something that that people are going to have an opinion about too, and that may hurt their perspective of who he really was earlier in his career. You can't really get away from stuff like that, no matter what, anyways, and it's always going to color the perspective that people have about you. But yeah, you look at 88 and 89 and 90, Luger is great. He's well on his way, and I think that's why people still continue to believe that he could be that guy, is because he was good in those years.
And I also think too, people that worked with him early on and throughout the years, like, you know, I know he's talked about, you know, being a kind of introverted and kind of like standoffish, and some people took that as arrogance and cockiness, but like a lot of people have talked about him being kind of a jerk. And I wouldn't doubt it, right? I wouldn't doubt it. He was kind of an asshole, and I think that also skews people' opinion on him. But when it comes to his work, like I think I recently listened to like a Jim Ross. I think he was doing Wrestle War 90. He was on his podcast, and he wasn't really that. He was pretty much just putting over Flair as, you know, carrying Luger and, you know, this and that. And I'm like, Luger hung with Flair. You know, Luger did a great job with Flair. Flair has always been very complimentary of Luger, working with Luger.
I will explain to you. Flair has a quote that I'm going to recite from his book that explains exactly what he thought about Lex and how he could get stuff out of Lex. So, you know, I think, you know, Flair's anybody who's facing Flair, you're always going to say that about them, right? Any of these bigger guys who weren't classic Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, Terry Funk kind of workers, it's always going to be that Flair carried them. And really, because the match was Flair's style of match, I could see why people say that. And they're probably right. Now, you know, is JR being biased because, you know, he loves Rick and maybe doesn't love Lex? Maybe, possibly. But yeah, so actually let's get into it, because, you know, little bit of a lead up, but I want to get into this because we got a lot of stuff to get into. So Flair, in his book, here's how he described Lex as a businessman. He says, in his book, he writes, "We called him a locker room lawyer. If we drew a $200,000 house, he would calculate the percentage due the boys. He'd point out things that were missing in the industry, asking questions like, why don't we have health insurance? Lex brought an awareness to the average wrestler that hadn't existed before." So, businessman, just like we said, he came from a world in football where he was making, you know, he was looking to make a lot of money, came from a very good upbringing. So his parents actually had money, and he's grown up with money. So he very much understands that part of wrestling. So where Dave and I left was, you know, Sting and Lex win the Crockett Cup, and then Barry had just turned on Lex as well. And so Barry wins the U.S. title tournament that was left vacant by Dusty when Dusty leaves and then comes back as the Midnight Rider for like 2 weeks or whatever that was in 88. He doesn't have the title, so Barry wins the U.S. title tournament, beating Nikita in the final. And so I was like thinking like, wow, you know, Lex is, you know, where was Lex? Where was Sting? Oh, Lex and Al Perez go to a double count out.
Yeah, well, they're saving Lex for Flair, right? The goals for Flair and Luger at the Great American Bash 88.
Yes.
You know, he did not need to win the U.S. title at this point. So that's fine there. But yeah, I can see, yeah, Dusty getting out of losing to Barry Windham, of course, right?
So we are around late May, and there are already rumors of Turner buying Crockett. So put that in your memory, because we will revisit that very soon. So at this point, if you want to think of the wrestling pay-per-view industry, we had just got over the time in 87 where Vince puts the Survivor Series head up against Starrcade and basically tells the cable companies that if they actually carry the Starrcade show, he's not going to let them have WrestleMania 4. So he does WrestleMania 4, and he tries to do a deal with the cable providers that no other wrestling group, and at this point it's only Crockett doing pay-per-views. AWA will come in late in 88 and try to do a show. That no one can oppose him within 60 days before or 21 days after a big show of his. He doesn't want that competition for pay-per-view buys. So originally, because WrestleMania was in March and Great American Bash was no, it's actually I forget. There was going to be a crossover with the WWE show. I think it was maybe SummerSlam and Great American Bash, which was in July. They thought that maybe they weren't going to be able to do the show, but they basically called Vince's bluff. The cable companies were like, "We're not putting, you're actually not allowing us to make as much money as humanly possible for these shows. So we are not going to go by these rules." And the Great American Bash is booked for July 10th. And so at this point, like you think of the direct TV and cable industry now, I don't know what the clearance is for a show, but let's say it's 90 million or 100 million, 100 million homes are hooked up to actually watch this show. Back then, we're talking 1988, late spring, early summer of 88, 10 million homes for WrestleMania 4. Wow. So the Bash, their goal is to clear as many places as possible so that people can watch this show. And they get up to 10 million to match WrestleMania. The actuality, and I'll talk about it in a second, is that they don't actually get to 10 because of a couple of different things. But you can just sort of the difference between when you and I were trying to buy, trying to beg our parents to buy this $20 wrestling show compared to now, like how easy it is. And it was not easy back then to actually rent or buy a pay-per-view show. And so another Flair quote, and this is where he talks about Lex's ability. He says in his book, he writes, "When Luger turned good and challenged me for the championship, I had to teach him how to perform and draw money. I made all his power moves look really convincing. As green as he was, I never felt like I was putting my body on the line. If he lifted me over his head and press slammed me, he was always careful. Naturally, a few of the boys didn't think that a guy so inexperienced merited this kind of treatment from the world champ. Hey, Luger looks like $1 million and he's a nice guy, I told them. I have nothing against him. He just has to learn how to work." So to your point, Flair, very, seemed like he really liked Lex and liked wrestling him, knew he was green, but in order to make money with him, he felt that, he was someone he had to kind of mentor and teach how to wrestle.
Yeah, same with Sting, though. Sting at Clash 1. I mean, Flair's telling him how, telling him to bang his chest, telling him to get heat, telling him to get through interaction with the crowd. Like, I mean, that's what Flair did, and that's his role. I mean, he's a veteran. I mean, these kids, Luger, like I said, 2 years in 88. Sting, I think same time, 2 years in 88. So they're both very young and green guys. So working with Flair and having him just guide him through. And I thought they both did a great job, especially that experience level. And, that's just a master at work. That's what veterans should do, especially a world champion should do. He's gone since 1981, gone to territory to territory as a world champion and making guys worse than Luger and Sting look good. Mm-hmm. I mean, he went like a Broadway with Rufus R. Jones in Central States. He went Broadway with a zonked out Kerry Von Erich that's never made video, but God, that'd be the greatest hidden gem ever. I would love to see that match. It's so bad that they didn't even air it on the World Class. So, he's the man, and that's why I believe he is the greatest of all time. And to do stuff like that. So yeah. So I don't think. Luger was, I don't think he didn't hold his own. I thought he held his own really well in those matches.
So the other thing about this is the book itself. Like, I was reading this book thinking that Flair was going to have some insight on his 88 matches with Lex and even maybe his 90 matches with Lex, and he didn't really. He just kind of talked about Lex a little bit. He focused more on Sting. That became more of a true sort of rivalry for him, but not a lot about these matches other than the two things that I pulled out. So Lex's book is even worse when it comes to these matches. He literally skips over them and goes right to WWF days. So at Clash 2, in his white tuxedo, Lex gets jumped by the Four Horsemen in Miami, And kind of the Clash 1 was all about the match, that long match. And Clash 2, they're setting up Great American Bash with the Horseman Beatdown.
Yeah. They had a contract signing earlier on the boat. Remember?
Oh, yeah.
Early in the show. And then later on, Luger shows up and gets beat up by the Horseman. Classic Horseman in the parking lot, beat down of the babyface and bloody him up and slam his head on the trunk of the limousine. So I thought all that stuff was really good.
What'd you actually think of the match at the Bash?
It wasn't their best match. I thought it was better than I remembered it being. They had some moments. There's Luger and Flair both went over the top rope. At the same time, they got kind of stuck, and they eventually made it over. But I always thought you should always bail out and just fall back in the ring and just get But it always looks bad when you have to try to push through. And I think Luger was pushing through.
They were also so tired by then.
Yeah, there was a moment too with Flair out of the corner with the inverted atomic drop and. Luger was supposed to block it and clothesline him, but then he kind of bumps back and falls on his butt. But then he just gets up super fast and still clotheslines the heck out of Flair, and the fans still go crazy. I haven't seen this match in a very, very long time. When it came to the blood, I remember my memory being a small trickle of blood, but there was a lot more blood than I remember, and so I definitely. Bought to finish more than what I remember. People complaining about it. That it wasn't too bad. Oh, great, wonderful. I was talking about earlier on.
The thing I as I was watching this match, I had Rick's quote sort of in the back of my mind, and the entire match is him trying to make Lex Luger look like. Superman, right?
Of course.
Lex is no selling stuff. He's coming back with power stuff. Flair's taking a bump and looking like he's dying. And so, from that perspective, if you thought Lex, was going to be the next big thing, I get it, because Rick was trying really hard to make it seem like Lex was going to be the next guy.
Yeah, that's his role. That was his role. That's Flair. Most of his matches was bumping around for whoever he worked, and that somehow, some way, at the end, he snuck away the championship.
And the one thing about if you think about Flair's WWF matches, he would wrestle a little bit more like a heel and more of like a chicken shit heel in WWF, but here. He didn't do a lot of that stuff, and I thought it made Lex look even bigger and badder because Flair looked like he was really trying, and then he was, Lex was still getting, beating him up, and so just a little bit of a different style because, in 3 years later he'd be in WWF, and I liked his WWF style too, but I could definitely see a little bit of a difference from 88 NWA Rick to 91, 92 WWF Rick.
Yeah. Rick wrestled, even though he's this top heel and heel champion, he still wrestled a lot, and he would cheat at times, but his cheating wasn't like later on he would do the low blow a million times or something like that, right? His cheating was J.J. Dillon would distract and he'd run a guy in a post, or he would, he would use a chair on a guy's leg or something like that. So nothing. That's all devastating stuff, but nothing to where it was he'd always go to low blow. I remember towards the end, he's always going low blow. He'd always just rely on, doing his backdrop, his flop, his chops. He did a lot more of the moves and different moves and stuff had more variety, I guess, when he was younger. But he's also younger in his prime, in his athletic prime. So, he had as he got older, and I know he did wrestle for a very long time. I'm sure he had his injuries that he had to work around, and shorten things up here and do some tricks. But here, 88, 89, 90, he still was, Flair in his prime and doing a hell of a great job. It's great matches.
All right, so the pay-per-view was this saving grace for Crockett, right? If they were trying to make big money on pay-per-view so they could compete, they were there's a lot of expenses going out from the office that they had in Dallas, along with the Atlanta stuff and these jets, and so expenses, and the hope was that the Great American Bash was going to do a great buy rate, and they were going to make a lot of money on this show. And it turns out that the buy rate was about a half of what they had hoped for. And so that kind of hurts their money situation, you know, sort of talking about why they would have to sell to Turner. They owe wrestlers balloon payments based on, you know, houses and being a draw and all that stuff. So that the balloon payments are owed, and they're also late on bills because you got to remember they were paying for syndication back then, right? You weren't getting paid to put TV on. You were paying for your tapes to run in markets that you would eventually then run house shows in, and you're getting advertisement for those house shows. So they are not doing great from a business perspective. And you know, I was mentioning the homes cleared. It was actually closer to 9 million instead of 10 because of, you know, certain issues. As pay-per-view back then wasn't easy. Like you would have to call on the phone, and sometimes you couldn't get through. And sometimes if there were too many orders coming in, you know, you couldn't get through for a long time. So, you know, there's stuff going on with that, and just the fact that, you know, there was 1 million homes that they couldn't clear that they thought they could clear. So ratings at this point also down. So things not going great for the company at this point. Because of these balloon payments that they're missing and not being able to pay guys on, I think it actually null and voids their contract. So let's say that you have a 2-year deal and they owe you money and they're supposed to pay you this balloon payment by March, and then they haven't paid you yet. It may have actually opened these guys up to become free agents at the time. So there's tons of talk around this time post Great American Bash, and we even talked about this on the last We Want Flair. Flair's talking to Vince, right? Like he's like, Vince, you know, he's talking to Vince, you know, can I come in? Vince, you know, has ideas, but he's not the only guy. And Tully and Arn quit in the fall, and they go to WWE, and the reason is because they hadn't received their money, but also because they just didn't like Dusty. They didn't like the booking. They didn't like the fact that Dusty was putting himself over more than everybody else, and so that was, you know, that was part of the reason, and they were able to leave. So they would eventually. They would have actually, a lot of these guys, you know, when they would actually do the sale for to Turner, and I mentioned the balloon payments, those were actually debts on Crockett, and those guys would actually get their money, but like 40 cents on the dollar. So think, you know, you're supposed to get like $100,000 check, and it comes in and it's like $40,000. So Dave Meltzer, again, you know, I'm getting a lot of this from the 88 Observers. He says he knows that one guy was out $120,000 because of this. Wow. That's nuts.
Yeah, that sucks.
So the good thing, though, is rematches between Rick and Lex are actually doing really great. They're, you know, that program after the Great American Bash is doing solid business. So I mentioned the syndication thing. Because they're having trouble paying for TV, they're losing some of those outlets. And really what they're looking to do is they're just trying to settle their debts, because Turner will not buy them unless they can settle the debts. He doesn't want to take on all the debts that they owe. So they're trying to pay off all these debts. So they owe Bill Watts $3 million for the purchase of UWF. They have not paid him for that. In JR's book, he mentions that he's supposed to have 5% of that. So when they get the sale, he's supposed to get 5% of Watts's money. And at this time, they're also looking to settle with Watts for a percentage as well. So, you know, the short story here is that JR gets screwed out of his 5%. He gets something, but I think he said in his book that Watts told him he will cut him a check for, I don't know, let's say $100,000, but JR has to fly out there, and he has to take Watts out to like an amazing dinner before he gets the money from Watts.
Jesus, my goodness.
So not only are there rumors about Flair leaving for WWF, also Luger. Luger talks about in his book about talking to Vince McMahon definitely before he does show up there in 92, I guess, with the WBF stuff.
Yeah, it makes sense that these guys will all start they start seeing the writing on the wall and start thinking, hey, I don't know how long this is going to last.
Yeah, the future.
Hey, you got to check in and see your value and see what New York can offer you.
So Rick still does not have an opponent for Starrcade. We're already in the fall. Starrcade is in December. There are rumors that Steamboat is going to come back to NWA and be Flair's opponent for Starrcade.
Wow, I did not know that. That's awesome.
I didn't know that either. So Turner finally purchases the company in late October / early November, and the company is going to be overseen by the president, Jack Petrick. Crockett is still around. He eventually, I think technically his title was that he was the booker. But yeah, so Jack Petrick is the guy, and he is soon going to hire somebody who becomes a little bit of a I don't know, negative figure in wrestling history. So Flair is frustrated, and he no-shows a couple cities and basically threatens to quit. He does not like his finishes. He thinks all of these DQ finishes and these dusty finishes are actually bad for business, but also bad for himself. And there's an idea that Bam Bam Bigelow, who is incoming, is going to do some shots with Rick, and Rick turns it down, saying, why do I want to defend my title against a WWF mid-carder before he even shows himself as a top guy in the NWA? So he shoots down Bammer. And in November, so mid-November, Dave writes something very cryptic in the issue saying, Flair is wielding his power and that Crockett has always backed Dusty, but he believes TBS will back Rick. So we get to closer to Starrcade. Dusty and Jim Crockett want the match to be Flair versus Rick Steiner. We've talked about that a lot. Dusty wants Steiner to quickly beat Rick and take the title from him. It's sort of a power play, power move to show, who's sort of the guy or who has the power. And Flair actually gets the match changed to Luger. Dusty then, and I would have never guessed this, Dusty actually tries to change it from Luger, and this is in the Observer, so I don't think Dave would have got worked here because of all the people he's talking to at this time. Tenru.
That's wacky.
Imagine a Starrcade 88 True Grit, Ric Flair versus Tenru.
I mean, that match happened later on in SWS Japan, and it actually happened in All Japan before that. But it would have been a good match, but no, not United States. No, and Norfolk, Virginia would not have cared
the
for
scope.
Yeah, the scope. One of my favorite buildings, by the way, for wrestling shows. Would not have cared for that match at all. So.
Okay, so Dusty just saw Rick kind of throw his weight around, no shows, and gets his way. So Dusty decides that that's what he's going to do. So he actually has a title match with Rick on the road, and he no shows that match. He called in sick essentially, and Dave calls it the Dusty flu. He says that's what people were calling it back then. Was anytime Dusty wasn't there, he might have the Dusty flu. And so, this is a common theme with the first three now months of We Want Flair is just sort of the Rick versus Dusty feud. And in this case, Dusty loses this one. He is forced to resign in December. And not only that, but Crockett himself is going to be out on January 1. So not only does Dusty lose the power play, but also Jim Crockett will also be out of power by January 1. So the reason is because Dusty does the angle with the Road Warriors where he gets spiked in the eye and blood goes everywhere. And this is after a angle in which Jim Cornette bled from getting hit with the phone, and TBS basically telling the guys, like, look, we cannot do this blood stuff anymore. And then Dusty immediately did it after that.
Yeah, they just
causes...
the old memo came through from the Turner people regarding blood, and then all of a sudden, that's what Dusty does to show, throws his weight around, and I'm gonna do it. I don't give a crap, and he does the blood angle with the Road Warriors, and that was a mistake, big time.
So Dusty, after being out power played by Ric Flair, decides that he's only going to book Rick on 5 shows in December. So Rick's not doing a whole lot there before Starrcade. Dusty wanted the Steiner Flair match, and part of that reason is because Rick is actually kind of hot at this point. He's doing a lot of stuff with Kevin Sullivan that people are finding entertaining, but he's also, from a fan perspective, he's one of the up and comers. But this is where Petrick overruled Dusty and made the change to Lex. And if Dave basically said it stems from Matisic being called in to sort of fix things, because you have these feuding, groups, and they needed some help in order to get the card ready. So Jim Herd, who was the guy that Petrick hired, is the executive VP. We talked a lot about Herd's relationship with Rick at the end of the last We Want Flair with Fujinami, sort of the post angle of Flair and Herd just not getting along, which leads to Flair leaving for WWF. But this is 2.5 years earlier, and Herd is the guy running the show. Petrick is the president overseeing everything, but he gives Herd the keys to the car. Okay, so that kind of catches us up. One more thing, and we'll talk about the actual Flair versus Luger Starrcade match next week on this show. Did you know that after Starrcade, after the pay-per-view portion of this show, that they did a bunkhouse stampede?
Yes, I did know that. I forget who won it though.
And you know who won? No, you don't. You don't remember who won?
Is it Manny Fernandez? No, I was kidding. no, I was joking.
JYD.
Yay.
JYD, who had just been fired by WWF, and
he took Nikita's spot on that pay-per-view, right? It was Ivan Koloff. It was supposed to be Ivan and Nikita's tag team versus the Russian assassins, who were in mask, who were Jack Victory, Mr. Reliable, and Angel of Death from Texas. So yeah, I do remember that. And that match was a whole lot of nothing. And JYD did not look like anything. He, poor guy, was definitely he's a shot of himself from the good old Mid-South days.
So the story on Nikita leaving is that there was a doctrine that all of the guys had to fly in and out of Atlanta. So let's say I think Nikita lived in Charlotte, so he would basically fly out and fly in from Charlotte, but the doctrine was that they had to actually fly in from Atlanta. I think this may have been one of the first TBS rules, and so Nikita quit. He was like, "Screw it, I can't. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever."
I think his wife was also his wife at the time. She was really sick with I want to say Hodgkin's disease or something.
But he shows up somewhere pretty quickly after, I think.
Wrestle War 89. He's a special referee for the Road Warriors and Varsity Club tag team match.
No, but I'm talking about after, he shows up in another company pretty soon.
God, where did he show up? It's a good question.
Yeah, and this is,
maybe it was Nelson Royal's promotion in Carolina.
Maybe that's what it was. It was.
Yeah.
And what if you're talking about what has aged the worst from this show in 1988, or this time frame in 1988 until now, has to be Nikita's flat top.
Yes, that's some serious. I mean, I had a flat top because I wanted to look like the Terminator when I was a kid. Nikita had it too froey up, man.
Oh my God.
He's almost going for the Kid and Play.
It was so weird. He was this killer with the bald head, and then he gets the flat top, and he looks kind of like he also lost a lot of his size too.
Yeah, I think a lot of it when he got married and things started changing, and I think something a lot to do with his wife getting sick. He got off the goody good and got a little lighter, but he's still had that explosiveness though. He's definitely had that.
So let's end it here, and we will talk about the match next week. I have not yet watched the Starrcade stuff yet. I wanted to wait to watch it after we talked about it. But from what I remember, it was a really good show. So yeah, I'm kind of excited to rewatch it.
The show's really, really good. There's a lot of good matches. Midnight Express versus Midnight Express, original Midnight Express. You know what's funny about that show? Now we talk about Rick Steiner being booked to I guess Dusty's not booking. Well, Dusty's there though. He's right. He's not booking, but he wrestles in that show. He teams Sting versus the Road Warriors.
I'm sure his influences were still sort of felt throughout that card.
But you would think like he was pushing so hard for Rick Steiner to get this big, quick win over Flair for the title. But when he was changed to Rick Steiner working Mike Rotunda for the TV title, which is the real natural feud there because they were building that up for months, the tension between them, and finally they turned on him, and then a big match for the TV title. That match was like 26 minutes.
I know. It's so long.
So I mean, that could have been a match where Kevin Sullivan pops up on the apron, tries to hit him with the spike. Steiner hits Sullivan down, return from behind with a knee to the back, whips him in, duck under a clothesline, bam, big Steiner line, 1, 2, 3. That would have been freaking awesome. Something quick and shocking like that. But then they go 26 minutes, which wasn't a bad match. It's just a long match
they had to teach the young kid how to work, man.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, but it just was too long. I thought that. I remember that about that show too. And I love the Bam Bam Bigelow versus Barry Windham match because it's a lot of fun in itself, and Barry's freaking awesome, and Bam Bam's such a big man doing all his tricks in this match. The finish might have been a little disappointing, but my favorite part of this match is Jim Ross's call when Barry Windham locks in the claw, man. Just listen, just tune in, man. Listen to Ross. It's just epic Ross right here with the claw on Bam Bam Bigelow. I mean, this guy sounds so dorky, but as a kid, you used to have those portable tape recorders.
Mm-hmm.
I love this call so much. I taped it and I would listen to it on my big speakers in my room on my cassette tape. I would tape this call, and I just remember like loving it so much that I did that so I can hear it on my big loud speakers, even loud in my room. So
should have been your ringtone when you got a cell phone.
Yeah, God, it's been a while since I've seen that match and that call, but I'm sure it's gonna give me goosebumps when I hear it because it's epic. Jim Ross, and Jim Ross is very, very, very best in my opinion.
With Ric Flair and Lex Luger, Starrcade 1988. We are finally here. I found this match to be very interesting. I probably haven't watched it since I got it on videotape, whenever it had come out on videotape. But yeah, it was a really good match, but I thought the psychology of the whole thing was very interesting because obviously we know what the finish is. And I watched the match thinking like, okay, as we get to the finish, and I know it's sort of like this kind of like for people who are into Lex, it's a little bit of a limp finish there for Lex fans. But man, like the entire story of this match was to make Lex look like $1 trillion. And then because his wheel gets taken out, he loses the match. But when you watched it back, what did you think of the whole psychology and like you as a Lex fan? I'm sure when you were younger, you were like, wow, he's really going to win this match. And then it's kind of a little bit of a deflating ending.
I thought it was perfect psychology. It's a big time NWA world title booking 101. You champion comes into a territory and wrestles, it's been done since the NWA title, right? Was, wrestled the local guy who just knocked out, drag outs the champion for, over 30 minutes. And somehow, some way, the champion sneaks out with a victory. But at the end of the day, like, you want to see the rematch. And I felt the same way about this. That crowd was super into Lex. They wanted a big title change. I felt like it would have been a perfect time to do it.
Yeah, but that was more my point, which is it's a little bit of like you're teasing the fans a little bit because you can sense that they want it. Now, I'm not saying that it was going to be the best for business or anything, but you can sense that they want it. They get the finish at Great American Bash where Lex, the idea is that Lex kind of gets screwed by the commission. And then so the Starrcade comes and you're like, okay, he's finally going to win this thing. And throughout the entire match, now it's sort of, if you understand the psychology of wrestling, babyface is beating up the heel, the heat and everything. You think, okay, well, the heel possibly winning this match in the end because he's getting his butt kicked the whole time. But I feel like as I'm watching that match now, again, not sure business-wise would have been better, but I feel like that crowd was ready for Lex to win that match.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That crowd was eating everything up that Lex was doing. I think it would have been good for business, especially short term. I think especially after that 88 and Flair being on top for the, over a year, I think it was time. I mean, I don't think Luger was a choice for a long-term champion at that point in his career, but I think if you to give him that credibility as a guy who won the big one at one point would have been good for his future career, and you can always go back to him down the line. I thought the match was just perfect. Ric Flair's NWA champion psychology. Same thing with Dory Funk Jr. Same thing with Jack Briscoe, Harley Race. Go in there, make the guy look like $1 million, like he's going to win the championship, and you sneak out with the win. And also, Lex didn't lose anything really from that. Honestly, I don't think he got hurt from this not this time around. And he got hurt later on with certain things. Like I think Captain Combat 90. Tainted him a little bit. Honestly, it did. Even though he's still the U.S. champion and whatnot, it took
What month is that match?
That's May of 1990.
Okay, so that's 5 months later.
No, it's a whole year and
a year and 5 months later.
Yeah. So
he doesn't mix it up with Flair for a whole year and a half.
No, Flair loses the belt to Rick Steamboat, as we know. Right. Luger wins the United States Championship. And Luger actually beats Ric Flair in a house show with the backslide, I believe, or something like that, clean, like defending his U.S. title with a lot of, or maybe he was just in the main event with Flair at the time. And I remember, being played up in the magazines. I rember reading that and I was like, oh man, he finally beat him. And then I did, I hope there's video of it, blah, 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 blah. But they don't hook up until in '89. They had in December of '89, after the I Quit match with Flair and Funk, they went back to Luger, and it was actually a really good promo by Luger on what World Championship Wrestling, what the show was called at the time before it was Saturday Night, where he comes out and confronts Ric Flair, talking about how he's been number one contender, how it's been a year since Starrcade, how he's, it's time for him to get another chance at the title. And of course they do wrestle at that Starrcade 89 in the Iron Man tournament. So that's probably the first time on television they hook up in a match, would be that Starrcade 89. I believe, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I believe that Luger was just building his, he had a babyface run as U.S. champion, the feud with Michael B.S. Hayes, and then he had feud with Rick Steamboat. He turned heel, feud with Rick Steamboat, and then he became, then he started working with Flair towards the end of the year, 1989.
All right, so let's walk through the match a little bit. I was just kind of taking notes while I was watching it. I just thought Lex is on absolute fire. Like, also, the other thing about it is his charisma during this match is like on a 10 from, what you'd normally see him as. I don't know. It could have been just the style of the match or whatever, but he is firing up at the right time. He is showing fire at the right time. He is looking really Flair's making him look like $1 million as well. And there's some WCW stuff where they miss camera work where, Lex hits the ropes and he's doing the jumping elbow and Flair moves out of the way and you can't actually see Flair move out of the way. So you just see Lex hit the mat. So there's goofy stuff like that. But I just thought, I'm just like, man, if I'm watching, because we just got through watching 93 WWF Luger last year when we were doing the Raw recaps. And I really liked that Lex. But this Lex was like on fire. Like I really, really enjoyed Lex in this match.
Yeah, no, his babyface run in '88 was really good. You know, his work in '89 as a babyface was really good. But you know, then he really turned it up a notch when he went heel in '89 too. But yeah, you know, he looked great. He had fire. I mean, I think he's definitely, you know, we talk about feeling the crowd. I mean, that crowd, one of my favorite crowds is Norfolk, Virginia crowd, and they just love wrestling there, and they always are hot for anything. They're hot for freaking Battle Bowl 91. So that, they were really behind him, and I think they expected the big title change there, and they're ready for it. But I love the match. We were watching again. It's been a long time since I watched it. I could tell Luger was very nervous in the beginning. He definitely, there's moments where he got, lost a little bit, and Flair had to kind of bring him back early on. But I think once he got into the flow of the match and his nerves were calmed, they end up having, like, and in my opinion, this is the best of the Luger Ric Flair matches.
You had a little bit of a back and forth with people on Twitter when you guys were trying to figure out what was Lex's best match ever, I think was the question, right?
Well, I think it was, it became what's his best match ever. And a lot of people say it. I think Big Dave said Luger Steamboat, but it was on a house show that you had to be there to see, right? Mine was just whatever made tape, right? So for me, this is my favorite Luger match because I thought he was fantastic, especially after, I don't know if you want to go through the match, but during the heat, I thought he was amazing.
I did take notes, but I didn't really, write down everything. But I think the thing that stands out to me is Rick is selling for him as a powerhouse. Like if you can imagine what the best Ric Flair Hulk Hogan match would have been at this time, like I really feel like this was like Rick was trying to turn Lex into something like that. Like, the other thing is that they did a lot of moves over and over and over and over again because they were good, and like it's not like they tried like a lot of variety of things, because it's probably like, well, why don't we do the things that we're really good at here? So you saw a lot of press slams and clotheslines and things where Lex was able to show the powerhouse that he was. But I thought that was kind of interesting. Like, let's just do the things that we can do that we know the crowd is going to pop for.
Yeah, he played to Luger's strength. The press slam stuff always gets over. I mean, who's not gonna pop when a guy that looks like Lex Luger lifts the champion over his head and drops him? The clotheslines look good. The power slam. I think they did like 3 power slams in that match.
Yeah.
He was going like 35 minutes, and I'm pretty sure that's where Luger's anxiety was in the beginning of the match too. He was he's going long, but he's with Ric Flair, so everything's okay. Once he gets comfortable in there, and he also pulled out a lot of stuff like that he rarely ever did, like the big drop kick. He did the drop kicks in '88, and after '88, he never stopped doing drop kicks,
and it was good.
Yeah, high, hit right on the button. The flying crossbody on top rope.
He did say in his book that I'm trying to remember. I don't think he said what his vertical leap was, but he said he could do a standing windmill dunk on a basketball court, which I don't really believe because he's only, what is he, about 6'3"?
6'5", 275, man. Come on.
I mean, talking about for real. For real.
Yeah, he's probably 6'3", yeah.
But he was, I'm sure he was probably, I don't imagine he was as bulky as he is in high school, but he's still a pretty big guy. So doing a windmill dunk from a standing position, I don't really believe that. But he did show he had a little bit of ups.
Yeah, I think after his Capcom at 90, I think Luger would actually throw the dropkick here and there. I remember, I think Stan Hansen got hit with the dropkick at Halloween Havoc 90. So I actually always get kicked because the dropkick's one of my favorite moves. So anytime guys would do a dropkick that normally wouldn't do a dropkick, I always would pop for that. And Luger, like I said, brought out a lot of new stuff too, like the flying cross by the top rope. I mean, I don't think I ever seen him do that again, since then, other than this match. And it looked good. Good crossbody. He also did, he did the superplex later on, but, I thought the superplex stuff was like perfectly timed. Like, just him like milking the crowd response before he hit it. I thought that was perfect. Yeah, I mean, this is one of, other than the little nervousness in the beginning, I thought this is definitely one of his best performances ever.
And so the press slam stuff does actually lead to the finish, so it does make sense as far as going to the well over and over again. So he puts a figure 4 on Rick. So he's putting Rick's move on him. And then there's some interference. JJ Dillon kind of gets involved. Referee takes a bump. Rick hits Lex in the legs, in the knee with the chair, which sets up kind of what's going to happen. And so Lex is selling the leg. It's affecting his moves and what he could actually do. And that sets up when he actually gets the press slam in again. And he can't hold it, and he's holding it. No, wait. Was it the press slam, or did he get him in the torture rack when Rick kind of manipulated him and fell on him?
The torture rack was the finish, but the press slam before that,
that's when he went down. Like he kind of showed weakness after that.
Perfect.
Yeah. Right.
He pressed him and delivered the move, but like immediately collapsed. Like he had that adrenaline rush. And it was, like I said, it was great. Even this, when he got hit with the chair across the knees, like that was like a perfect sell. That's like how you really would sell being hit with like you would scramble and you would clutch your knee and you would, you don't just sit there and just go, ow, he really. I mean, God, I think this, like I said, that's why I won the match. This is one of the matches I picked because I just loved his performance in it more than just Flair. I mean, Flair was brilliant, of course, but a lot of people overlook Luger and a lot of his work. And this is a match I hope that people revisit and appreciate Luger's work here. And also with the selling in the figure 4 when he got locked into the figure 4 by Ric Flair, I thought was great. And perfect, classic Flair telling the guy to fire up, and the big double bicep pump, and traps just looking awesome, and all standard Ric Flair match stuff. Everyone got Ric Flair in the figure 4, right? And then he locks on his figure 4, but like their work in that was just perfect together.
So when you are watching this match, even as today, when Flair escapes this match as champion, you don't think it hurts Lex, and I get that, but looking at the totality of his career, it's sort of the way that his big match career kind of went, right? Like when we're talking about these years through 93, 94, when he was still kind of the guy and looked at as possibly the guy into the future. Like it just felt a little weird to rewatch that and go, dang, I remember what I felt when I was 12 years old, thinking, man, when is Lex going to win the big one?
Yeah. I mean, he's always had that career of moments where he should have been, maybe his time was to be champion, but some circumstances out of his control, didn't allow it to happen. Bash 88 was building up rematches to build to, a bigger match, right? That was that result, which is nothing. That was perfectly done. I mean, I know a lot of people complain about the lack of blood, but like I said, going back and rewatching it, I thought there was a decent amount of blood. We're the guy that could say, it wasn't just a trickle like a lot of people always say about that match. Here, it could have been a perfect time to do it, but Ted Turner bought, WCW. The main, one of the main reasons he bought it was because he wanted Ric Flair to be his champion. So, you're not going to upset the guy who just bought the promotion, right? The boss. So, and then later on, where it could have been Luger's chance to beat Flair finally for the gold in 1991. Flair has a, disagreement with Jim Herd, and he leaves, and Luger's, when he finally gets the belt, he's beaten Barry Windham for a vacated championship. And then fast forward past that, his match with Yokozuna at SummerSlam should have been a title change, but Vince was holding out because he felt like it should happen at WrestleMania, but unfortunately, too much time had passed from SummerSlam to WrestleMania, where Luger started getting cold, feuding, with Luger Vorga. It was fine, but it just kept, he just kept getting cooler and cooler. And then at the same time, Bret Hart was heating up again, and it just didn't work out for Luger. And I guess his big championship win, was like what, 97, or was it 96 or 97 when he beat Hogan on Nitro, which was a big moment, big pop, but it was also a 4-day thing, and then he lost it at Hog Wild or Road Wild, whatever it's called then. So yeah, just, but those main moments, like 91 would have been perfect. 88 would have been perfect. 91 would have been great too if he was just able to beat Ric Flair.
Yeah.
And I think 93 was a miscalculation by Vince's part, and he should have beat Yokozuna then. He just looked, and I think I hurt him more not beating Yoko that night because he looked like a dunce. So,
totally.
Cheering on a count out win over a champion. It's just the biggest celebration for a count out win in history.
Okay, We Want Flair. Whoops, dropped my pen. We Want Flair. The third segment, which is just the aftermath of Starrcade '88. So we talked last time. Lex and Rick happens, and this is right after Turner buys the company from Crockett, and there's frustration, there's politics going on, and Dusty Rhodes is sort of on his way out. Ric Flair gets to still be Ric Flair, and Lex Luger is the match that they've sort of decided, and we talked all about whether or not it was the right finish or not. Lex looks so strong in that match, but so now what happens in January of 1989? The biggest news in January is that Ricky Steamboat agrees to terms with Turner, and he comes to the company to headline the February 20th pay-per-view against Ric Flair. So Steamboat is the new challenger, and they bring him in a very memorable way. Do you want to kind of describe how Steamboat comes in? In the angle?
Yeah, he was a mystery tag team partner for Eddie Gilbert against Barry Windham and Ric Flair on World Championship Wrestling in the old studio. And it was definitely one of the memorable, returns to a territory or to a promotion. And Steamboat would repeat this a couple years later in 1991 too, when he came back with teaming with Dustin Rhodes against the Enforcers, Arn Anderson and Larry Zbyszko. So yeah, and it was a fun match, and what a way to ignite a new challenger by just having him cleanly pin Ric Flair in the tag match right on television.
So the story that's heating up is really Ted Turner versus Vince McMahon. And it's so interesting reading back through these observers to really understand where the business was going at that time, because you remember pay-per-view had really only been around for like 2 years as far as that being the way that these companies made money on their big shows. WrestleMania 3 was only 2 years prior to this. And so it was still sort of like in its infancy. And I used to wonder why the pay-per-views were when you wondered how the business was, there was always a buy rate. And the reason why there was a buy rate is because the audience, or the folks who were capable of actually ordering a pay-per-view, like that audience was so small, and it was different based on the event. Like a Mike Tyson fight was obviously going to have everybody, and every possible pay-per-view company was going to carry that. So the audience, it could be in 15 million homes or whatever. But a WWE show was maybe in like 9 or 10, or they were only able to clear that many homes because there's a deal, right? We're gonna put on this show. I'm trying to think of some of the pay-per-view companies back then. What was it like? Was it Request something or other?
Request was the first one I remember.
Request TV and Viewer's Choice and those. It's like, okay, I have this show. I'm going to put it on. I want people to be able to order it. And they're like, okay, but what is the split? And the pay-per-view company, you know, maybe gets 60 and Vince gets 40 or something like that, right? Like that's how it worked. So the Vince coming off of WrestleMania 3 and WrestleMania 4, you know, we had talked about how he had manipulated them as far as Starrcade, you know, Starrcade 87. He sort of forced their hand and said, if you don't make us exclusive for Survivor Series, you're not going to be able to carry WrestleMania. And some of those companies, the majority of those companies did not call his bluff. And so, you know, there's still sort of, you know, who's in charge here when it comes to this stuff. So now you have Ted Turner come in, and Ted's got connections, right? Like Ted is a connected guy in that industry. So Vince thinking, you know, he's the biggest game in town, and he really is. Like, you know, Great American Bash, Starrcade, the Bunkhouse Stampede, you know, there was a lot of hope an expectation for those shows to do WWE numbers, but they didn't. And so Vince now knows, like, okay, like I'm the main game here. I want to renegotiate this deal. I want to get more money of the split. And so what do these cable companies do? They go, okay, Vince, hold on. We'll get back to you. And they went, hey, Ted, do you want to run a pay-per-view up against WrestleMania 5? So everyone knows that The Clash actually runs up against WrestleMania 5. But originally, that was supposed to be a pay-per-view to go head up against WrestleMania 5. But these pay-per-view companies were trying to strong-arm Vince into accepting a deal that was better for them. So they were like, well, Vince, like, you know, you can run this show, but we're actually going to carry Ted's show instead. But if you kind of come down from this, you know, this high dollar amount that you want for each show, if you want to renegotiate, if you come down from that, then, you know, maybe we'll talk Ted out of not running against you. Mm-hmm. So they use Ted against Vince. Vince comes down from his negotiation, and then they tell Ted, no, why don't you just, you know, let's not run the head to head. So the NWA looks like jackasses here, you know, and they were kind of used in this war. So, you know, just the whole Ted versus Vince and the cable companies and how that plays into the part. You don't often hear that when it comes to the Monday Night War story, but it is really such a big part of it. So I'll come back to that in a second, because, you know, what happens to Dusty? You may remember this more than me, so I'll let you kind of talk about this. But so Dusty and NWA split. Dusty goes to work for Florida, CWF, and he's trying to bring in all of his buddies in the NWA, right? You know, Dick Slater, Dick Murdoch, Barry Windham, all those guys. And so he, you know, basically says that, you know, he's gonna bring in Gary Hart, he's gonna bring in Abdullah the Butcher, he's gonna bring in Murdoch, he's gonna bring in Al Perez, like I said, Wyndham, Baby Doll, and then he challenged, like, you know, Flair and the Road Warriors and Hogan, and, you know, basically said that they were cowards, so they weren't gonna come in. So Murdoch does a TV taping, but then he re-signs with the NWA like right after. Barry never does, because he signs as well. And so, you know, Dusty doesn't get the guys that he's thinking that would be beneficial for him. So what people often forget is that he didn't literally go from NWA to WWF. Like, there's a period in between where he's trying to do other stuff. And here's the part that I didn't even realize, is that he did a couple shows with the AWA. I did not remember this. Do you remember this at all?
That I don't remember. I do remember the PWF. was the promotion in Florida. He tried to, start that up again. And I think he had Terry Funk. He had Dustin. Young Dustin was on his roster, stuff like that. It was, it's a fun show to watch, actually. Not the best wrestling all in all. Like, they had some lower end talent, but the main event stuff was pretty decent. Fred Ottman was Big Steelman. He was this, the big heel that Dusty.
He was like the first like major feud or something, right?
Yeah, that was the feud. And they did a live special, which was, I think, called Homecoming. And I think I have it on DVD somewhere. And it was a big cage match with Big Steelman versus Dusty Rhodes. And but soon after that, I think it was just not gonna, he knew he wasn't gonna be successful, so he ended up signing in with Vince.
So who comes in as the NWA booker? It is George Scott. Now, George Scott and Jim Crockett did not get along. And so when George Scott is hired, Jim Crockett is like, hey, I don't really like this guy. He should not work here. And they basically said, Jim, you have no power. Sorry, bud. George Scott is booking this company. The war of... People remember the Monday Night War and all the trading of talent, not trading, all the, taking of talent, signing of free agencies. So right after this time, we already know that the Brain Busters, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, are in WWF. Vince then hires J.J. Dillon away to basically help with and be on the management team on his company in the office. And then he takes Tony Schiavone away, and Tony Schiavone's kind of frustrated because once Turner comes in, and the people that he put, we mentioned Petrick and those guys, they go full boat with Jim Ross, and so Tony Schiavone's kind of like doing syndicated stuff, and he's not too happy, and Vince takes Schiavone. So the Four Horsemen are in a bit of a quandary here. The only ones left are Rick and Barry, and then they lose their manager. So who replaces J.J. Dillon as their manager?
Hiro Matsuda. Yamasaki
becomes the manager.
Apparently, like, big Japanese corporate was like evil in 1989. Yes. I don't really remember, but I was just a kid. But apparently that was like a heat machine. They thought, Yamasaki. Here comes the big, powerful Japanese corporations that's going to take over the NWA, right? And they have their world champion.
Well, yeah, this is 1989. You remember the movie with Michael Keaton?
Yeah, Gung Ho.
Gung Ho.
Yeah, which my parents took me to see in the theater. I had no idea what the hell was going on. I just wanted to see Michael Keaton because I liked him from Mr. Mom and Johnny Dangerously. But
oh yeah.
But I actually rewatched that movie Gung Ho I would say 2 years ago, and I found it to be very entertaining because I knew it, if I understood it, everything when I was watching. As a kid, I'm like, what are we here for? Let's watch something else.
So there's a scene in that movie where they're playing softball, and I guess the Japanese buy the company or something, so now they're all running it, right? Is that the story of the movie?
Yeah, and then the gentleman that played Long Duck Dong in 16 Candles, he's stuck between, right, the corporate, but then also getting to know Michael Keaton and the American crew, and it's a funky movie.
And then, so I remember there's a scene where I think George Wendt, so Norm from Cheers, they're playing softball, and he runs over one of the little, the smaller Japanese guys or something, and it's kind of like, oh, that maybe that works in American softball, but that's not here. And so then there's one scene that I will always remember because it's so juvenile, but I forget, but the American guys were like, everyone had to use the restroom. They're using the urinal, and so the American guy's like, oh, yeah, you want to bet, we piss for distance, and the Japanese guy looks at him and goes, we piss for accuracy. For some reason, I always remember that.
Gosh, wow.
Okay, so back to back to the
That is your gung-ho review of the week.
Exactly. A movie that I probably haven't watched in like 30 years.
That's funny.
Okay, so that's that with with the talent, and a lot of the NWA talent originally, because of the changeover, they were not really happy with what was going on. But I think the way that that Turner sort of appeased folks is just made sure that people were getting paid a little bit and maybe a little bit more or whatever. But you remember, we talked about this last time, but some of the goal is to bring over some WWE WWF faces to to draw some of that audience. So that's definitely going on. And this is Vince's answer. Is like, well, I'm taking JJ, I'm taking Tony Schiavone. So this is my favorite part of this, and this is pretty much the end of it, because we don't need to go any further into this. Just in case we decide to cover the Flair Steamboat series of matches, we'll kind of let that sort of begin where we are ending here. So on February the 3rd, Vince calls up Ted Turner, and he wants to make a peace pact about the wrestling war. He wants both sides to agree to stop raiding talent and to stop trying to sabotage each other's pay-per-view events. This is after he takes J.J. Dillon and Tony Schiavone, and he's like, okay, we're good. Like, let's just stop. I'm clearly winning. My pay-per-views are doing great. Yours aren't doing great. Let's just call it Pete. Like, you keep your guys, I'll keep my guys. While at the same time, he's trying to sign Sting, because Sting's gonna be up for renewal soon. So, just amazing Vince. And look, I'm not saying Ted Turner is not a savvy business guy. Like, that's not it. But this is like, Vince is just wrestling savvy, which is probably a little different in business.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. Vince he just likes to play the games and mess with people. And I think that's why, hearing that story is the reason why Ted had such heat with Vince, right? And I was very, end up being extremely competitive with him, like, of course, in 95, even though I thought he should have been a little more competitive in 1989, but at the time he was, probably focused on other things. But when he gave the go to Eric Bischoff to, be competitive with WWE, that's, of course we know all that story. So, and it's funny, like, it's just what a wacky time. And it's, cause I was a kid, I was like, what, I don't know. I know I was in 6th grade at the time. And like, I just felt like pay-per-view was around for a long time. Mm-hmm. And now thinking about it's only 2 years into it, man, like we grew up with all that stuff and wasn't pay-per-view like $20 back then? I remember, like, compared to WWF though, NWA was $20. I think WWF was like 25. I remember.
Yeah, and like, here's just to show you the technological advances over the last 30 years, which is part of the reason why Starrcade didn't do as many buys as they had hoped, is because a lot of the cable companies in the I'm guessing the more rural areas couldn't handle the volume on the last few days. Like, so they could handle, like, if you wanted to order it 10 days out or 5 days out, like the volume wasn't coming in that heavy, so they could sort of handle all the calls. Remember, because you would have to call in. Mm-hmm. But like the last minute rush to get the show, some of those areas couldn't actually deliver the pay-per-view because they couldn't handle the volume and they just couldn't take any last minute buys. So so that's also part of it, which is, Vince is, he's marketing these things way out in advance so that, you could buy, like, if you're going to buy WrestleMania 5, you may as well buy that thing two weeks early so that they could turn it on for you. And then, that's a lesson that they had to learn, was like those last minute buys were technologically, in some areas could definitely handle them, but some areas couldn't. And so they were losing possible buys on shows like that.
And now we just click away and it's already on our screen.
Though,
except at Big Dave's house, that's challenging him many times.
The last, I think it was, it may have been Mayweather McGregor. A lot of people had trouble getting in at the last minute, even through the digital ways.
Wow. So
that's
crazy.
Yeah, even today you can flood the bandwidth in ordering shows or whatever.
Now, are you also disappointed as myself we didn't get the four horsemen of Ric Flair, Barry Windham, Kendall Windham, and Butch Reed?
Yeah, that was the rumor, right? Like that was rumored to be the four horsemen.
They shot an angle with Kendall. He turned on someone. I want to say, I think it was maybe Eddie or something. Eddie Gilbert, and he walks off with this when JJ was still there, walks off with JJ and Barry, and turns to the camera and throws the four fingers up. Mm-hmm. When he did that, he disappeared because he was king at the time. But can you imagine that? I mean, people talk about Paul Roma days and stuff like that. Like, gosh, Butch Reed's a hell of a talent, but I just can't imagine Butch Reed and hanging out with the Ric Flair, the Horseman group, at the time.
Yeah. I mean, he's the Lex or the Sid of the group at that point, if he does do that. And what's interesting is Butch Reed is actually an interesting choice because he's coming off of a horrid WWF run where he was just used improperly. He became a cartoon character. He wasn't a badass anymore. And so do people still buy him as that? He would actually, get it back later that year, right? And they would do it under the masks, and then they'd unmask, and as Doom, he would get that back a little bit to be that guy again. But it'd be interesting, and I'm not saying he was a bad choice. I don't know. He proved with Ron that they could still do some power stuff for sure, and that could have probably worked. I mean, I could imagine him and Flair as a tag where, Flair's doing a lot of the selling, and then then Butch is the punishment guy. I could see that working.
Well, I could definitely see the team of him and Kendall with you had this veteran leading the young kid in the match. And then, Reed got a second, at least on Life, when he teamed with the younger Ron Simmons and became a tag team to be a singles wrestler. And also we should talk about Lex Luger at the follow this. Like, his consolation prize was the U.S. Championship at Chi-Town Rumble in February when he beat Ric Flair. He beat Barry Windham for the United States Championship. And so Luger, he was a U.S. champion with the Four Horsemen 87. Like, I think that was like a kickoff of like his long run. And I mean, you think of the US, it's funny, like WWF or WWE will never mention Lex Luger when it comes to the United States Championship, but he's probably one of the biggest United States champions historically for his long reigns. Like, I think he held it for like 18 months at one point. And then, and so, but due to like, they're like, stay away from Lex for whatever reason. He just never gets mentioned when it comes to like, when they always talk about the first one, Harley Race and Ric Flair and multiple Hall of Famers, but they just never talk about Lex, which I always think is a bummer.
Yeah, it is a bummer. But that kind of puts a cap on this We Want Flair, our third We Want Flair of the year so far. And next week we will take a week off, but we will come back with the next one. I don't even know what the next one is. Do you remember?
Savage and Flair at WrestleMania 8, maybe?
Is that
thinking?
I don't know. We'll figure it out. I told myself that I was gonna remember to look, and I just forgot to look.
I want to say it's Savage and Flair WrestleMania 8.
I mean, that'll be a great one because that is, we're talking about our WrestleMania tournament. Savage and Flair is in a first round matchup with Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon to get out of the first round.
Yeah, it's tough.
And last I looked, Savage and Flair was one poll vote ahead in the tournament. So
I went with the ladder match.
I went with Savage and Flair, but this is a toss-up, right? It's an absolute toss-up.
Well, I went with the historic perspective. Like, that ladder match went on to, good or bad, introduced, even though it was done before and, other matches, but like really that ladder match from WrestleMania 10 is what introduced the boom of multiple ladder matches throughout every year from now on to this day. So that's why I went with the historic value of that match. And it was also a great match at the time too.
No, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. That show, I think a lot of people think that WrestleMania 10 was probably the better show, though I really like WrestleMania 8 too. I think it's an underrated show. But yeah, like I think it's a great matchup. Like, there's some matchups where they're like absolute blowouts. And let me see one of the blowouts. So Austin and Brett, right? First round matchup against Mick Foley versus Edge from WrestleMania 22. There was one person who voted for WrestleMania 22, and that was our friend Becky. I think she may have even accidentally done it, and she didn't realize. But so the tournament is really fun, and this was the first round matchup that I could not wait to see the people react. And if we have a tie, I do dial the bat phone and get Big Dave to break our tie. So hopefully we won't get a tie for this one, and people will determine, and I don't need to bring in Big Dave.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. That's it's been fun. I'm trying to keep up. You post them so fast, and I got to look at it. Was it WrestleMania or are we doing matches?
I know. I got to do 4 a day in order for us to catch up. Two matches and 2 WrestleMania cards. So that's how I'm doing it. So that we can get to the finish by the time of WrestleMania next Saturday. So what are you thinking? Should we do 1 post-game show, 2 post-game shows as far as covering WrestleMania? Because it'd be Saturday night and Sunday night. Probably for the significant others in our life, probably doing 2 would be a little bit of overkill.
I think 1 is fine. Unless something really newsworthy happens, but most likely for me, I'm watching late anyway, so it's not watching live, so it's gonna be tough to do 2. Hopefully I can watch. Are they gonna be like 2 hours each, or days, or 3 hours?
I'm guessing 3 hours plus each.
Okay. Yeah, maybe 1.
All right, so you're right. Flair Savage for WrestleMania 8 is our April. We Want Flair, and the interesting thing is we sort of set the stage for Flair going to WWF with the Flair Fujinami thing. So starting with Flair Savage, like the story that you have to tell, at least in the beginning, is Rick in WWF. So that will be the first part when we start that series. The first part of that will probably be the long part, because we're basically telling, we've already told the story of Rick leaving, and now we got to tell the story of Rick getting to WWF and what they do with him early on. Because what they do with him is, sometimes head scratching, and it's not like he was booked tremendously until that Royal Rumble. Like that Royal Rumble is basically where they're like, okay, finally they figured it out. But then they get to WrestleMania 8 and they get the title off of him pretty quickly. So it's just interesting. His run there is interesting because it's short, it's memorable, and you almost feel like they could have done so much more.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. I remember being completely shocked by the title change at WrestleMania 8. Completely shocked.